Hello Popcorn Junkies, welcome to this review of Friendship, the latest A24 indie comedy, starring Tim Robinson, Paul Rudd and Kate Mara. We did a reaction to the trailer for this. Promised to be a sort of comedy verging on sort of surrealist horror. Riff on male friendship, what it means to be a man. Let's talk about the stars to begin with. Tim Robinson, I don't know him, apart from I recognise him, and I guess that might be because I've seen him on things like Saturday Night Live, things like that. Paul Rudd, ubiquitous, we all know Paul Rudd. He's obviously got a little bit of a relationship with A24. He was in Death of a Unicorn, obviously recently in Ghostbusters, Anchorman. He's been around for years, and he's funny, but his shtick is straight-faced humour. I think it's the first film by the director, Andrew DeYoung. I think it's their debut feature film. An indie film about male friendship. Tim Robinson plays a sort of put-upon... Is he put upon? He plays an erstwhile, hapless, suburban man, married with a wife who's just kind of beaten her battle with cancer. She's in remission. The film starts with them in a sort of self-help group, sort of almost like an AA meeting for cancer sufferers, cancer survivors. And from the get-go, he's a man. Tim Robinson plays a man, Craig, who quite routinely and consistently puts his foot in his mouth. This is a film about the insensitivities, the childlike stupidities, the insufficiencies, and the infancies of man. And I say that as a man who also knows that some of the things that annoy the hell out of my family are also some of the things that they find quite sort of charming, I think, and I hope, which is one's kind of crass stupidity and the way in which men can revert back to toddlerness quite quickly. So this is really a film that's a portrayal or a representation of the pitfalls and the pathos, really, of being a bloke. It's about a bromance. He, quite early on in the film, he has to deliver a wrongly delivered parcel to a neighbour down the road. That happens to be Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd it has to be said, he's sort of riffing on or kind of fusing quite a few of the characters from Anchorman. He's got his character from Anchorman in there. He's got a little bit of Steve Carell's Weatherman in there. And he's got a little bit of Anchorman in there too. He's kind of a bit kind of cool. He's a bit kind of blokey. He's a pat on the back kind of guy and chink your bottle of beer. I find that kind of... I have a problem with maleness. I have a problem with... I can be male and I can have my own brand of maleness, but being around the kind of bros being male, I find really difficult. I can't do it easily. And I think a lot of men can't. And I think most men are kind of putting on an act, or, they're trying to sort of showman the whole thing, the sort of brouhaha. And so from the get-go, he delivers this parcel. Rudd sort of expresses a scintilla of kind of interest in maybe we should do something. You live down the road, we're neighbours, let's get to know each other. And of course, Craig, played by Tim Robinson, is in like a flash. He's like, okay, fucking hell, someone sees me. And I think that's something else, that's another theme that this film is about. It's about the invisibility of man over a certain age. And I can think of another film recently that was about exactly the same thing, which was Dream Scenario. This is a film all about Tim Robinson's character trying to forge that friendship with Paul Rudd, which, to be brutally honest with you, at the beginning of the film, at the beginning of the story, is not hard. They go foraging, they hang out, they go adventuring in the sewers of the city and find themselves in the city hall. But what quickly creeps in is the awkwardness around Tim Robinson, the awkwardness that the way in which he finds it awkward to kind of connect, the inability to sort of belong to blokey kind of groups or be able to reciprocate the kind of friendship that Paul Rudd's offering. And I think what's quite interesting about that is there's a truth in there for all men. I think, and women, obviously, but women have a more natural ability to connect. I don't know why that is. I think men are always looking for what is that meaningful thread. What's the baseline of connection between us? Where's the safety zone? Let's think of it in sport. Where's the baseline? Where's the halfway line? Where's the penalty box? And where can I rest assured that we're going to be able to connect forever in this area? And there are some real clues dropped in this. Unfortunately, some of them I can relate to. He keeps sort of banging on to his son and his wife. There's a new Marvel film out. We should go and see the new Marvel. The amount of times I've said that in this house, I've given up now. There's a new Marvel film, and they're all saying it's a really good Marvel film and all this kind of stuff. Bless him. He's trying. but it's predictable, and it doesn't read the room, and it doesn't speak to the interests of the rest of his family. And there are quite a few shots of Tim Robinson's character at home kind of looking and kind of being perplexed almost by the intimacy between his son and his wife, the fact that they kiss each other on the lips and stuff like that. So what we have in Tim Robinson's character, he wears a beige brown puffer jacket. It's nondescript, it's unsexy. His face is almost an extension of his coat. His head could be his hood. His trousers are the same colour. He's a man of routine. He's a man of little imagination. He's not sexy. He's not spontaneous. He doesn't read the room. He has a sense of humour, but his sense of humour is very much along the lines of, think of David Brent from The Office. And I think at times, especially around the work scenario for his character, this is very The Office. It's the same. It's mining that same furrow of, awkwardness, egotism, the hubris of trying to kind of make out that your strength is and your virtues are these things, but in fact you're just coming across as a cringemeister, and everything you do to try and belong and be cool just makes you more and more uncool. This guy can't be cool. And so this develops into a really quite socially awkward bromance. There are many moments in this which are deeply uncomfortable to watch or discomforting to watch, and many scenes where you're literally wincing. And it's an absolute tribute to Tim Robinson. Tim Robinson is excellent throughout. Paul Rudd is kind of what you expect from Paul Rudd, and I hate to say it, I think sometimes Paul Rudd is a bit generic and a bit sort of one note, and I think in a weird way that's kind of good for this character. I mean, we discover that he's in a band, he's the local weatherman on the cable TV station, so within a sort of microscopic suburban sense, Paul Rudd is a celebrity, if you like, almost of sorts. He's certainly a celebrity among his friendship group, and we have a particular scene where Tim Robinson his character is invited along for a boys' night in to do some drinking and just hang out, and it all goes terribly wrong because he walks into a French paned glass window in the back of the house that then crashes in. Every step he takes, every move he makes is awkward and cringy beyond belief, and you're just wincing as you think, oh, he's striving to connect, but he just keeps disconnecting more and more and more and more. And we mustn't forget, men gain meaning from sort of the simple things in life, like having a drink or smoking a cigarette around a bin outside of work. And there are lots of moments, lots of situations, lots of sort of group shots of men gathered, sort of awkwardly not saying very much, but kind of hanging out and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Paul Rudd is the antithesis of this. He sings in a sort of punk rock band and he's sort of blaring away. And one night, Craig, Tim Robinson's character, decides to take his wife along to the gig. She can see in him that he's actually getting all excited. And you sort of strive at points in this film, you think, oh my God, this could be the chrysalis moment. This could be where Tim Robinson's going to literally flourish and become the complete sort of raging punk meister that he's always wanted to be. But no, alas, he doesn't. They have a sparring session in Paul Rudd's basement or garage. They get the boxing gear out. They put the boxing masks on. And what plays out is a genuinely horrendous scene of masculine confusion, ego battering, striving to not look like a beta male, wanting to be the alpha male. And in the boxing, he kind of keeps being hit by Paul Rudd. They're all cheering. It's bros, it's blokes, it's bros. We've just had a scene where they're all singing together. They break into proper song, and it's very funny. It's meant to be funny. I mean, no group of friends would break into beautiful song in the way that they do in this film. A cappella, all kind of riffing. It is funny. It's very Anchorman-esque. There's Tim Robinson just sort of on the edge. A lot of really powerful long close-ups with Tim really looking at these guys and trying to process and understand what is the DNA of their connection, what are the things that are tying these guys together, holding them together. And of course he makes a mistake during the sparring match of thinking it's landing a punch, and he lands a punch that's a bit too hard on Paul Rudd's face, and it all goes totally Pete Tong, to the point that we have possibly one of the most oddest scenes I think I've seen in recent, certainly indie cinema or cinema for a while, where striving to make up for the fact that he's clearly crossed a line, hit Paul Rudd hard, alienated the group of friends, Paul Rudd's friends, who are like, whoa, dude, what's wrong with you? Why have you gone too far? Tim Robinson puts a bar of soap in his mouth. The idea being, you know, if you swear, wash your mouth out with a bar of soap. So he puts the soap in his mouth and he starts to talk incomprehensibly. It makes no sense. He's got a bar of soap and it's just gibbering around. You're looking at him as the audience. Paul Rudd and his friends are looking at him and you're just like, what the fuck is going on? And really, that's the fulcrum. We've had all these scenes of them foraging together, picking mushrooms, eating mushrooms, singing in a group, going to see music, drinking beers, chink chink. And then he goes and makes this mistake and Paul Rudd backs off fast and the bromance is over. And whilst the comedy continues in this film, and there's lots, I mean, it's comedic all the way to the end, the comedy really pivots away from kind of laugh out loud, kind of, oh, the stupidity and the embarrassment, Office style, you know, David Brent style of this bloke. It then becomes something quite dark and quite depressing and sad. And that's where the pathos comes in. I think it was a brilliant performance by Tim Robinson. It's genuinely funny and laugh out loud at times. But his isolation and his sudden being locked out of the friendship with Paul Rudd, locked out of a friendship with the group. One day he turns up at Paul Rudd's work whilst Paul Rudd is doing the weather. And to be fair, you know, Tim Robinson's character is the one who's kind of encouraged Paul Rudd to kind of be ambitious and go for the morning slot as a weatherman. So in a weird way, he's delivered on his promise as a friend. He's motivated Paul Rudd, etc. But you can see Paul Rudd's had enough of him. Paul Rudd wants him to get away. He's got the ick. Paul Rudd gets the ick. And so this film at its best really kind of bites close into, takes a close bite, munches at the center of what it takes to be a man. What is it that makes us connect? What is it that principally makes most of us not connect? Where is that line which is crossed between being a bro and not being a bro? And then as it kind of veers off, and as kind of, you know, Tim Robinson's character is basically ghosted and held outside the friendship circle, and is at sea, and his relationship starts to kind of fall apart too, and he loses his shit at work. You know, his life classically starts to implode. There are surrealist touches in there too, some real sort of surrealist kind of developments where he goes to this phone shop where he's upgrading his phone, and the guy who serves him says, if you want anything stronger ever, just give us a shout. He says, yes, I do, and he gets taken into a back room. Possibly one of the funniest, undruggiest drug stories, which is funny because it's quite undruggy. He has the most boring hallucinatory trip, licking the tongue or the something pheromone kind of part, or the neck of a toad. I've heard this before. There was another film, wasn't there, where someone was carrying a toad around for the drugs. So he licks the toad, and unfortunately he's so boring, and this is where it's very like dream scenario. This guy's trip is going into Subway, ordering a Subway sandwich, and then he comes to, and it's just like, even the guy who's given him the toad to lick for the hallucinatory trip says, is that it? But where this film is most interesting, and what I think, where it becomes less of just a Tim Robinson's uncle, therefore Tim Robinson is not a good friend, is where the connection between him and Paul Rudd remains even whilst Paul Rudd has cut him loose. The thing that really gives this film a sort of anchoring is that there's a moment in the film where Tim Robinson sees Paul Rudd fall, and Paul Rudd reveals, I think they've been arrested for loitering or adventuring or something. Paul Rudd's wig comes off. And so the ultimate in emasculating moments for Paul Rudd, Tim Robinson sees, and Tim Robinson sort of says nothing. And Paul Rudd says, you know, you're right, we're keeping that a secret. And so in a weird way, you know that Tim Robinson's character has got real leverage on Paul Rudd. He could threaten to use this. And there's a moment later in the film, a real kind of moment where you think, fucking hell, could this become violent? Could Tim Robinson completely fucking wreck his whole life here? And you think, oh, he could use this knowledge to his advantage and force the bromance, force the friendship to be a friendship. But he doesn't. But he also keeps the secret to himself. And so there's something really heartbreaking in the fact that whilst Tim Robinson's character doesn't get the friendship he wanted, he doesn't ever really get the renaissance of that intensity that him and Paul Rudd had at the beginning. He's forever indelibly connected to Paul Rudd through the fact that Paul Rudd knows that Tim Robinson hasn't revealed or spilt the beans when it comes to his hair. And I think that sort of stuff really speaks to the idea that all men have Achilles heels. Every man's worried about their status, their alpha maleness, their penis, their body, their wife, how much money they've got, what car they've got. There's a lot in this about, Paul Rudd wanting a certain car. What is male friendship? Is male friendship about having in a friend something you want for yourself, or is it about seeing in a friend vulnerabilities and protecting them? And I sometimes wonder whether that's the difference between male friendship and female friendship. I think women, and it's a gross generalization, women are far more kind of collective and communal and supportive, though of course it can get a bit bitchy too. And men aren't. Men look for differences, men look for very simple connections, and if those connections don't work, or if they go awry, or in the situation where Tim Robinson punched Paul Rudd in the face, Paul Rudd's ego was damaged at that point. And so because of Paul Rudd's ego, it's all ego. So all the men are performing what they performing roles that they think they should be performing. No man is ever just who he is. And in a weird way, ironically, you could argue that Tim Robinson at the beginning of this film, that's the character of Craig, he's at his most honest at the point that he's not trying to develop a friendship. So what is male friendship? How can men have friendships where you can just be yourself? Because not even Paul Rudd was being himself. At its simplest, his hair wasn't real. It was all a front. And when you see Paul Rudd at work, when Tim Robinson goes in to see him at work, you see Paul Rudd being bossed about and spoken to horribly. So he's not the big I am either. What is being a man? What is friendship? So I think this ends up being a really funny, bittersweet, tragic, quite depressing, sometimes surreal portrait of the difficulties of finding connections between men, and how even when you find those connections, they can implode within a nanosecond if the fragile ego of either man is in any way kind of damaged or knocked sideways. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was a really interesting, thought-provoking film. I thought the performances are sensational. Yes, Paul Rudd's a bit one note, but in a weird way he needs to be. Tim Robinson carries this film. He's very, very good. He's very funny. He's very entertaining. There are some absolutely laugh-out-loud moments in it. Could have been a bit more detail given to Kate Mara. I felt that they could have drawn a little bit more complexity into his relationship with his wife. She felt a bit of a sort of siphon. She's sort of quite stony-faced and quite straight-faced all the way through it. So you didn't feel there was much there, though. Her narrative, she loses interest, and it's a riches to rags, suburban riches to rags tale, where a man becomes unhinged, and really this is midlife crisis stuff. But if I was to give it a score, I think I'd give this 85 out of 100.